Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, across North America, we're really kind of painting the corners here with our most adverse weather. First, the large nor'easter that has developed over the last 24 hours has produced some incredibly strong winds across the Northeast. I've seen reports getting upwards of 90 miles an hour, and over Mount Washington, we actually saw a wind speed that got to 125. That nor'easter is still going to be problematic today with a very, very strong winds as it exits the Northeast. Meanwhile, in the Gulf of Mexico, we got to be paying attention to what could potentially be Tropical Storm Nestor as this particular system gets organized and pulled into the main flow coming across the United States. It might bring some very heavy rain that initially starts off between basically Alabama over towards South Carolina, but might be bringing rain as far north as Virginia as this system progresses forward. While the midsection of the country did get a bit of a break from adverse weather, we can already start to see winds advecting or moving back toward the north. We're going to watch for a weak low pressure system move across this region, bringing a cold front through the Midwest here that could possibly bring in a bit of a chance of rainfall over our weekend. But the main story, I think, as we progress with this forecast is going to be the strong winds that are moving across the North Pacific Ocean right now. That is a part of a jet stream pattern here that is taking aim on the northwest first and then racing through the midsection of the country. So we have some very strong winds out west right now developing throughout the day. The good news is that the trajectory of these winds, although very windy and quite dry, is such that we're not blowing a Santa Ana wind across parts of California. So let's take this and step up in the atmosphere and take a look at what the jet stream pattern is doing. This is unique. We have a jet stream right now that starts in Japan and basically goes zonal all the way across much of the North Pacific at incredible speeds, and then dives into the North Pacific part of the United States, the Northwest part of the United States, builds into a ridge in the midsection of the country, and then there's a cutoff low associated with that trough that's giving all the adverse weather throughout the day today in the Northeast. So this particular pattern is one that is I would say it's kind of locked and loaded with potential to give us a lot of headaches. So let's just take a look at our infrared satellite animation here to see all of these pieces coming together. Over the last 24 hours, you can see the large nor'easter racing up the east coast of the United States. We can see the beginnings of that tropical disturbance coming out of the Bay of Campeche, getting into the Gulf of Mexico, watching this system again racing here across the southeast. The midsection of the United States, due to some upper level convergence coming off of that ridge, you can see the cloud field kind of evaporating under the sinking motion of the atmosphere. That's very cool dynamical response here in the midsection of the U.S. But the west is taking a beating right now with strong onshore flow, and that's going to continue into the foreseeable future. Our all hazards weather map in the Northeast, much of the warnings we're still paying attention to here are due to the strong winds. We do have some flooding issues going on, but you see that there's a wind advisory, that's this color stretching in through here, gale warnings off the coast. Stepping back across the midsection of the country, we do have a frost advisory out for parts of Michigan, northern Indiana, and the northwestern corner of Ohio this morning. And if you're just looking down here at Mississippi, this is a child abduction color. So an amber alert right now for the state of Mississippi early this morning. Out west, where we have those stronger winds and drier conditions, this is all red flag warning, high wind warning in Montana. And then this is all high surf advisory here along the west coast. So maybe some good surfing out there on those stronger winds that are coming through. But this map is going to change a lot in the coming days because of the powerful low that will be moving through the midsection of the U.S. So the break that has been felt here over the last few days is about to change because of this system that is coming in. We did see over the last 3 days very heavy rainfall down in the southern region here, stretching across a lot of the cotton belt. Now we're in the thick of cotton harvest right now, which is ahead of pace compared to a year ago. But some of this heavy rain, we saw upwards of 5 to 6 inches in some places. And then in the Northeast, some very heavy rain, of course, wrapping around that deep nor'easter that went through that area. Well, as we look forward in this forecast, I want to start off in the tropics. This is right now called 96L. We're giving this about a 70% chance of developing here over the next few days. You do see that the GFS model has a very tight clustering of the potential track of what would become Tropical Storm Nestor at some point as it moves over the Florida Panhandle and eventually into southern Georgia and over toward the Carolinas. And that's because the upper level flow steering this is pretty well defined. And so we're going to watch for the moisture of that system to move into the southeast. So what are we looking at? Well, this is now a map of precipitable water valid late in the night on Friday, in fact, early Saturday morning. And what I want you to key on is how much moisture is coming out of this tropical system and potentially getting right into these states before moving here up the East Coast. So this could be a very heavy rainmaker for parts of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and getting into the Carolinas and eventually over to Virginia. Meanwhile, as this low begins to take shape at the end of our weekend, beginning of our weekend, it is able to tap into some Gulf moisture. So we're going to watch for this corridor for a band of showers and potentially some thunderstorms. But the Pacific Ocean is loaded up with more moisture, sending it into the west coast of the United States. So we need to see how all of these things evolve here. So I'm going to watch now one of our high-resolution models, and let's just get us to early this morning. We're watching, again, the heavier rainfall on the backside of that nor'easter. We will be getting some high-elevation snow out of this, but take a look at the pressure gradient here. Very, very strong winds with this system. While that system's going, the midsection of the country is relatively uneventful. We do need to be watching throughout the day on Thursday, getting into early Friday morning, though, for the return of moisture. That's on the backside of what could be Tropical Storm Nestor. And as Nestor moves toward the Gulf Coast here, we can start to see a well-defined circulation, and it may be bringing some locally very heavy rainfall into parts of Mississippi, really mostly Alabama, Florida, and Georgia as we progress throughout the overnight hours on Friday into Saturday morning. Same time by Saturday morning, remember, we saw the moisture return here, so could be seeing a narrow band of showers with maybe some thunderstorms on the south side of this. But notice the Pacific Northwest through Northern California has the next round coming through, and this is the system we've got to be watching for midweek over the weekend and early next week. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to stop you right here, 7 p.m. on Friday. We've already discussed these features. So as we get through the early morning on Saturday, we can see the rain from the tropical disturbance now moving through the southeast, potentially very heavy rainfall. Widely scattered showers through the midsection of the country here early Saturday morning. But take a look at the northwest United States. As this next system barrels through, we could be bringing a lot of snow to the Rocky Mountains here. Snow elevations may be getting down to 5,000 feet or below. But by Sunday morning through Sunday midday, we're going to be watching for the development of this low pressure system. So as one exits and brings maybe some meaningful rainfall here into the Carolinas and Virginia, we now see our next low pressure system firing up in the midsection of the country. And right now that system becomes very well defined in the GFS model and goes from the border of Nebraska and South Dakota straight toward Lake Superior. Now, as this system goes through the midsection of the country, we do have the potential for severe weather along its tail end, so we need to be watching this at the end of our weekend and the beginning of next week. So I'm talking Sunday, Monday, primarily Monday, in through this area for some severe weather. And then on the backside, well, here is our problem with this system. It does have the potential to drop quite a bit of heavy rainfall in parts of the Dakotas here, and that will be falling on ground that has a lot of snow on it still right now in this corridor. And the GFS takes this straight through parts of Lake Superior into parts of Ontario. And on the backside of this, incredibly windy conditions. The tail end of this front will not have any trouble moving through the mid-south, getting over to the east coast. So again, heavy rainfall out of this system as well, hitting a location that just had the tropical disturbance go through. Now I'm going to stop you here because I want to specifically talk about a week 2 event in a moment, but let's get right now to the differences between our models. The main difference is not in position. The GFS has the low here, the European has it there. The difference is in the strength. The GFS has a much stronger low pressure system than the European model does. It's a more wider open wave in the European than it is in the GFS. Now, what does that mean? Well, that changes the trajectory and speed of this system, such that by Monday, our low pressure center is now sitting over Lake Superior in the GFS, and it's a bit further back in the European. The front is much further along through the eastern Corn Belt in the GFS, but it's lingering a bit farther back in the European. So the speed and timing of this system is critical to understanding who's going to get what out of it in terms of precipitation. So let's get right to that. On the left, I have the GFS. On the right, I have the European. This is looking at the next 7 days of total accumulated precipitation. Similarities first. This area right in through here in both models. You see the streaks in the precipitation. That's where these larger dynamical models are picking up on the potential for thunderstorm activity. So we have to watch that corridor for the potential for not only heavy rainfall, but also the potential for some severe weather. What else do they agree on? Well, you can see that on the back side of this, in through parts of the Dakotas where we have snow on the ground, we could potentially be bringing in quite a bit of rainfall, at least an inch. And I don't want to have to say that, but that is what we're seeing in that area. Both models do attempt to bring in a dry slot that comes through parts of Nebraska into Iowa. Can you see it right here? But the differences are in central and eastern Iowa. We can see that the European is much wetter in central Iowa than the GFS is, and it's also wetter in parts of Missouri and Illinois than the GFS is. Again, the GFS is a tighter system with a more defined dry slot, and it races more quickly toward the Great Lakes rather than lingering. The other thing I want to address in this, besides this system, is where the GFS wants to take the moisture from the tropical system versus the European wanting to bring it a little bit farther to the north, bringing in a lot more rainfall into this corridor than the GFS does. So we're going to have to watch both models progress with this system over the next 48 hours to see how it really plays out basically into early next week. They do at least agree on, for the most part, what's happening in the Pacific Northwest, but I wanted to spend some time discussing those model differences. My greatest concern when it comes to Midwestern and Central U.S. ag is the fact that we still have in this area, the equivalent of 1.5 to maybe 3 inches of liquid equivalent in that snow. So that's going to melt. In addition, we've already seen up to this point that same region has an excess of anywhere between 4 and 6 inches of excess soil moisture. In fact, this whole region has got quite a bit of high soil moisture content. And just over the last 30 days, we've noticed that corridor has seen anywhere between 400 and 600% of normal rainfall. Add to that where the system's going through, and you can see that we're going to be putting down more precipitation across a region that has also been extremely wet over that time period. The recent heavy rainfall has at least brought this region back up toward normal, although it did it to the tune of 3 to 6 inches of rain over a couple of days. And this tropical system will be moving right here, hopefully eroding some of the problems we've been having with drought in this corridor. So this is an active week that is coming up. So what about week 2? European ensemble on the right, GFS ensemble on the left. Good model agreement. Wet in through this corridor. We see dry in the northwest, but some differences maybe lie in what's going on in the midsection of the United States. While we will see a drier time period emerge after this next deep trough sweeps through, there's 2 of them coming through actually, after they go through, remember, it doesn't cure all, and our harvesting windows are going to be very tight in the midsection of the country, despite the fact that we don't see a continuation of the incredibly heavy rainfall. But there is one system I do have to talk with you about, and it's this system right here. So this is the big trough that sweeps through we've been talking about. As it wraps up here over the Hudson Bay, you can actually see a second trough that sneaks through Alberta, eventually through parts of Saskatchewan, and then eventually comes right here into the North Dakota, South Dakota region by next Wednesday night. And that little trough, I know it doesn't look like much here, is going to initiate another low pressure system in the midsection of the country before we get into the week 2 time period. So this is next Thursday. Now, we'll talk about that in a second, but do notice that after this, the jet stream pattern wants to go for the end of the month over into a broader ridge out west and a trough over the east. What does this translate into? Unsettled cool weather in the east, warming trend out west, and in between the two, again, upper level convergence, drier pattern in this area, if this is the eventual evolution of this pattern. I think it does hang on through the end of the month, but we're going to have to watch out for the beginning of November to be quite volatile, I think. So let's take a look very quickly at that next system. Again, it's the same story. The GFS has a powerful low, whereas the European has a much weaker system. The open wave in the European brings it farther to the east than the GFS does at the same time next Wednesday. And that is an important difference because look at what happens by the time we get to next Thursday evening. The GFS has a powerful low sitting here over parts of Michigan and Wisconsin. The European has a much weaker low that's progressed a bit farther to the north and east. What does this mean? What are the differences? Well, the differences are all about the timing and the amount and the type of precipitation. The GFS being a much stronger low, unfortunately, with the colder air that is in place, will bring more snow to the Intermountain West and potentially in through this corridor. Again, this is late next week. We do have the potential for possibly bringing in some snow. You're looking at a map that shows the probability of grabbing at least 3 inches of snow through the next 10 days. I just want you to watch that area I shaded on the back side of that low that, again, does this for the potential for some snow. Just want to give you an early kind of warning about that, okay? Now remember, after that, maybe the pattern calms down, but again, very active next week. As we begin our temperature discussion here, as we start to wrap up this video, I put this in the long range update yesterday. It's looking at through the first half of this month of October, who's seen a temperature below freezing. And I just want to let you know, in this area here, where we did get some patchy frost, much of that location there barely spent more than an hour or two below freezing. Meanwhile, back to the north and west, well, look at this map. This is showing you locations that have recorded a temperature below 28 degrees Fahrenheit. We've actually seen a long duration hard freeze event throughout much of the Central Plains and, of course, getting into the Rocky Mountains. So I just want to bring those two things to your attention again, follow up from yesterday's long-range forecast video. As we look forward in the forecast, I just want to play out for you the operational GFS model. Because with the developing system out west, before it gets here, we see Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we're going to see a resurgence of warmth in the midsection of the country. And that's going to promote some of the melting of that snow before we bring more rain on top of it. It is a disaster that is unfolding in this part of the country. I don't know how else to stress it, but a moisture disaster. I'm going to play this quickly because I just want you to get a handle on the overall pattern. As we progress toward the end of the month, we see a couple of big cold fronts that come sweeping through. That's very normal for this time of year. But we're not shy here on bringing in some cold air as we get out toward the end of the month and start of November. All right? So that's why in our temperature patterns, over the next 5 days, while the West Coast takes on the brunt of the jet stream, the ridge builds into the midsection of the country, bringing in some warmth, and we're still dealing with the lingering effect of the cold air behind that upper level low through the southeast. But looking into the day 6 through 10 time period, now we have that deep low that comes moving through, and you saw it brings its front, and behind it, much colder air sweeping through. The West Coast, meanwhile, begins to rebound in temperatures such that through the 11 to 15 day time period, when that flow pattern is doing something a bit more like this, yep, we got a lot of cold air that is sneaking through the eastern half of the country, but the West Coast may finally be going over toward a warmer pattern as we finish up the month of October. That is our longer range temperature forecast. To finish this out, I'm going to talk quickly about South America. We've been very dry in Brazil's eastern growing region, so the Tocantins, Goiás, Bahia, that area, and also eastern Mato Grosso. Western and northern Mato Grosso, where they've been doing quite a bit of their planting, has been on the wetter side of things. But overall, we're about 10% off where we were a year ago with the planting progress of soybeans. Where it is forecast to be wet is in Brazil's southern growing regions down here, bringing them out of their drier conditions. But overall, this slower planting progress is not going to impact soybean and soybean production, but it will likely have an impact on the planting of the safrinha crop, which is typically a corn and cotton crop later on this year. That delay could be as much as a month, which could really impact in a detrimental way the quality of that corn crop. And we're going to have to watch it very carefully throughout the coming weeks and months. But with that, I'm going to go and wrap this video up right here. Thank you for your attention. Have a great end to your week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.